Thank you, Dr. Waters, for sharing this panel. Dr. Waters is from the Department of English.
This particular panel is called College, Race, and Poverty. There will be 3 papers presented, and then a question and answer session, and questions can be entered into the chat, or you can raise your hand and ask the questions. So the first paper is called Poverty Amongst College Students, and this is presented by a group of students from the Women in Society class. They are Gabby Glidewell, Jay Paget, Nina Goodman, and Hannah Allen.
Poverty Amongst College Students, brought to you by Nina, Jay, Gabby, and Hannah.
There are many reasons why there's higher poverty rates among students. Tuition is not the biggest concern with poverty rates among college students. It's more of having a place to sleep and not having enough food to eat. Food insecurity affects 1 in 2 college students, and 14% of people at college are homeless. Many colleges are trying to give their students food that need it and implementing programs. Many students are at risk of getting kicked out of the dorm due to the fact that they're not able to pay for their housing bill. And students that do live off campus are also facing eviction due to the fact that the housing is so expensive and they can't pay for their monthly rent.
So, intersectionality of minority students especially, if we focus on minority students specifically, they are concentrated in areas of higher poverty due to segregation with residents. And so this leads to fewer opportunities and continued segregation. These students are less likely to be identified for special education if they need it. And things like this can lead to academic achievement gaps between different minority groups. It means that some have resources and others don't. And the continued segregation leads to groups continually not having the resources that they need in order to succeed in the classroom. In order to end racial segregation and economic inequality, we have to end all types of poverty caused by segregation specifically. So if we look at this chart, this is just a basic. If we look at the biggest section, over 52% of people who enroll for undergraduate programs are white. And then if we just specifically focus on the green section, that's African Americans, which is a much, much smaller portion of undergraduate enrollment.
Okay, so some environmental factors that affect how students interact in a classroom setting. So the first one is peer interactions, and these build a support base for the success at the collegiate level. It's one of the most influential and demanding factors when transitioning into a college environment. Some of the financial situations that play into peer interactions can be like food insecurity, emotional isolation, and impoverished circumstances. The next one is classroom environments, and this provides a sense of continuity for students. It provides a structured schedule and socialization opportunities that lead to those peer interactions. The financial situations that play into the classroom environment can be unstable transportation, unreliable housing, food insecurity, and access to electronics. The last one is physical environments. So this can be described as how the campus looks and feels to an individual while on campus. So this can be divided into like the type of town surrounding the college, climate, geography, and student residencies available around the college affects the ambience that the college portrays. So some financial situations that play into physical environments can be changing climate and geography. So in case of like a natural disaster or inclement weather, students have to have the proper resources to react accordingly, such as warm clothing, running water and electricity, and a sense of community while enduring those experiences.
a lot of effects that growing up in poverty can have on your academic performance. For example, being raised in poverty increases the likelihood of emotional and social challenges, as well as chronic stressors caused by the environment, which even if you get out of the environment and you're impoverished situation, the lasting effects are lasting. They do not leave as you leave your environment. So it's really detrimental. This can cause permanent changes in brain structure relating to memory. In the classroom, this can lead to severe, or in general, this can lead to lasting and mental health issues like depression and anxiety, which can last for your entire life, even if you leave the impoverished situation you might have been in. When it comes to the classroom, it can have a negative effect on emotion, comprehension, and focus, as well as confidence, which are really important for all areas, no matter what you're studying or what classroom you may find yourself in. As well as the fact that people who grew up in less fortunate situations, they are less likely to choose to further their education. When it comes time to be your own person and grow up and be independent, you don't have anyone making you go to school or making you pick a degree. And people who grew up in impoverished situations and have harder time focusing because of like mental issues, they might be less likely to just choose to not further their education.
As the old saying goes, knowledge is power. Having a higher education can lead to many things, including the development of skills and abilities, which can lead to earning a higher income or further developing other basic assets. Having a higher education can also help fight against inequality, as education is a basic human right for all. It is also an opportunity to prove oneself. Students with a college degree have fared better than those who either dropped out before graduation or only earned a high school diploma. According to the U.S. Census Bureau, as of 2020, this graph shows that even a little bit of college education can lower the risk of someone ending up in poverty compared to those without a high school diploma.
So there's many ways to make college more affordable. One is applying for financial aid, which is a free form. You could also look for local scholarships and finding any scholarships provided by your institution. If your high school provides it, take any college courses through them and see if there's any dual credit classes that you could take as well. Not always an option, but try to go to an in-state college rather than an out-of-state college. If able, go to community college for 2 years, then transfer to a four-year institution for your last 2 years.
Okay, so some resources that are available at WSU. The first one is Handshake. So this resource will connect you with job opportunities that are located close or on campus. So if you do have unreliable transportation, this is a good option. The next one is the Scholarship Universe. So instead of actively searching for scholarships, this resource connects you with the financial assistance that's looking for those in your circumstances. So federal aids, better known as FAFSA, and grants. So these sometimes, especially with grants, they're reliant on your GPA or your ACT or SAT scores. But for people in poverty, these scores are often hard to achieve due to their classroom or home life environments. So we do have a great financial aid team here at WSU. So they can help you financially plan out expected costs and meet your circumstantial needs. The next one is the Shocker Support Locker, and it helps WSU students, faculty, and staff provide, so it helps them provide just basic necessities. The next one is Office for Student Money Management, and they provide free personal finance education for students by students. The next one is Tutoring and Supplemental Instruction. So this provides students who are taking classes to be known difficult. So this is essentially free tutoring. So the next one is that we do have some success coaches here at WSU, and they're here to support both faculty and students on a department level as well as on one-to-one. So this they split up into different colleges. So depending on which college you're at, you'll get a different support coach, but they just basically assist you in your success here at WSU. The next one is the WISE Counseling Clinic. So this provides free mental health services to students. Considering that students come from all different backgrounds and some home situations, that can affect how they interact on a day-to-day basis. So this is also a really good resource. And then this is just our references.
All right, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
So moving on to our second presentation. The title is More Than Resilience, Race, Ethnicity, and Sexual Dynamics. The presentation is by Alondra Valle, a psychology and criminal justice student taking Ms. Carolyn Williams' Women in Society class.
You grew up a happy child, but somewhere around 8 or 9, it just stopped. I don't really know or understand what happened. My mother had admitted to me on one of our nightly phone calls. Since I moved out in pursuit of higher education, I got used to the phone ringing at 8 p.m. sharp, with the word "ama" written across the screen. I grew up against the odds and the grain of the universe, the first child, the first daughter, the first to live alone at 18, the first to pursue a college education, the first to achieve dual citizenship, all to immigrant parents. I've come to understand why my mother calls me every night without fail. She moved to the US at 18 because her family had run out of money for her to pursue her own education. She made the trip alone, said goodbye to her mother, and moved in with a brother 16 years her senior in the United States. She attempted community college, but quickly accumulated debt. Fast forward, her child has the opportunity to pursue higher education, this time for free, except not really. The experiences lived within my life became the entrance fee. I'm a daughter born to Hispanic immigrants. I am the first in my family to receive an education of this level. I am a survivor of abuse and re-victimization. These stories and experiences I was able to piece into an essay. This essay was my entrance fee, and my trauma was given a price tag. At the age of 5 or 6, I learned English. At the age of 7 or 8, I learned what words like sex meant and was never taught to say no. At the age of 9 or 10, it manifested and I became angry. At the age of 11 or 12, I believed it was my fault. At the age of 13 or 14, I learned about systemic racism and misogyny, or at least the terms for them. At the age of 15 or 16, I got my first boyfriend and learned that saying no wasn't as easy as they would say in sex education classes. At the age of 17 or 18, it happened again, but this time I left. I knew it wasn't my fault, and I was able to put it into writing. However, this isn't just about me. I am one of the thousands, one of the millions. Not all my life experiences are exclusive just to us. They aren't individual. So we think, did it happen to me because of my gender or because of my race? The answer is neither and both. Our experiences are intersectional, and institutions have yet to catch up over things that have been happening to us over centuries. We're expected to become parts of these major institutions that weren't built up for us. We try to take advantage of our new resources. We use them to cope, our majors revolving around our healing. We don't want what happened to us to happen to others, to the little girls we see on the sidewalk that we see ourselves in. In the university databases, I've let myself learn what I already knew. That women of color have been historically sexualized since the founding of this country through terms like the Jezebel. That we are more subject to become victimized within our own homes and our own cultures. Beware of your uncle or your cousin, and if your family stayed back home, you'd likely already have become a victim of femicide. We are subject to be victimized by our partners, in fact, 25% more than our white counterparts. We are imprisoned for defending ourselves at nearly 2 times the rate, regardless of our age. If we're lucky, we escape imprisonment and end up homeless because 79% of those women have escaped violence, landing into poverty. And if, like me, by some miracle, we defy the odds, we're victimized, but we escape death, and we escape imprisonment, and we escape homelessness, and instead get accepted into universities that validate our trauma worth of scholarship. Then we are labeled as resilient for making up less than 12% of diverse institutions. Resilience is a congratulations for not dying. Thank you. But we'd like to be more. Gender and race should not be seen as independent experiences. No, it did not just happen to us because of our gender or because of our race. Our experiences are intersectional. We bond with our roommates, with our closest friends, in our dorms or in our apartments over resilience, laying on the floor after a fit of laughter. We try to laugh it off at our resilience, but it's accompanied by deep-pitted dreams of one day thriving. It's time for institutions to catch up. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Tom and Angie, I'm hoping that you'll save your questions until the end so that we're ensured that we have time for the other panelists. I realize that this is, prompting an immediate response, but if you could wait just a moment till the third presentation, which is Stories of Hagar, and it's by Hannah Holliday from Creative Writing and Christina Young from Political Science, who are both taking Dr. Renfred Tella's Women in the Bible class.
I'm Hannah, and I'm presenting with Christina. I'm a creative writing major, and she's a political science major. Yes, we wrote these pieces for our Women in the Bible class as assignments. We're going to present two of our own interpretations of what the life of Hagar in the book of Genesis could have looked like. We aren't given very much context. So the little information that we are given on her in the text is expanded upon to put focus on one of the Bible's first female characters. So our goal is to emphasize and explore those often looked past in patriarchal literature. Christina will go first.
Mine is simply titled The Story of Hagar, and uses much of the quotes that we have in the Bible interspersed. Hagar stood along with the other female servants that their leader, Pharaoh, had promised to the man Abram. The man was from another land unknown to Hagar. He had arrived a mere week before with the woman Sarai, who he called his sister. She was a woman of great beauty, and Pharaoh immediately desired to take her into his harem, an honor only befitting the most beautiful of women. Hagar, though, was never that. She was a simple Egyptian woman who was far from the foreign beauties that Pharaoh so adored. She, along with the other female servants, went everywhere with Abram in the month that he spent in Egypt, tending to him hand and foot. However, soon a great plague came upon Pharaoh and his house, and it was revealed that the cause was Abram and Sarai, as Sarai was no sister to Abram but his wife. Hagar and the other servants stood behind their master Abram as Pharaoh confronted the man. "What is this you have done to me? Why did you not tell me that she was your wife? Why did you say, 'She is my sister,' so that I took her for my wife? Now then, here is your wife, take her and go." Abram did not attempt to explain himself attempt to explain himself the best he could, but there was no excuse for the lie. The man and woman had no space to take the near dozen male and female servants, so they told all but the woman Hagar that they were dismissed. He presented Hagar to Sarai, saying, "I present this woman servant to you for the hardships you have suffered this past month in the land of Egypt, dear wife. Do as you will with her, as she is now yours." And so, with Abram and Sarai, she went back to their homeland. Soon after their return, Hagar would overhear a conversation between Abram and Sarai. Abram said, "The Lord has spoken to me and formed a covenant. He said to me that my offspring, this land would belong." However, Sarai did not look pleased like Abram expected. "What are we to do, my husband? For after years of trying, I have yet to become pregnant. I do not question the ways of the Lord, and I know that everything that is what is planned for us." Her words trailed off, and it appeared that she sat deep in thought for a moment. She looked back towards Abram with a sense of conviction in her eyes. "Behold now, the Lord has prevented me from bearing children. Go into my servant. It may be that I shall obtain children." Horrified, that is what Hagar felt in that moment. Overwhelming dread came over her. She did not want to live with this man, much less conceive his children. There was no choice in the matter, though, for Hagar. She was but a servant, Sarai her master. The options were to do as she said, or die disobeying her master. Sarai, and by extension Abram, had a vice grip on Hagar's life. She was not allowed any self-determination. Her will was but the will of her master. Hagar and Abram were then codified as husband and wife, and the day Abram came into Hagar was one of great trauma for her. When she found that she had quickly conceived, she gave a sigh of relief, knowing that there would be no reason for Abram to violate her further. After all, Abram had no love for the slave woman. She did not possess conventional beauty like Sarai, so what use did she have for Abram other than that of a walking womb? Hagar's hardship did not end that day, the day she conceived, though, because as Abram began to treat her better as she carried his child, Sarai began to perceive Hagar's gazes as ones of contempt. Sarai felt anger towards Hagar for being able to do what she could not, even if the idea had been all her own. Hagar was there the day that Sarai confronted her husband, saying, "May the wrong done to me be on you. I gave my servant to your embrace, and when she saw that she had conceived, she looked upon me with contempt. May the Lord judge between you and me." Instead of defending the wholly innocent Hagar, he said back, "Behold, your servant is in your power. Do as you please with her." From this day forth, Sarai acted in cruelty towards Hagar. She forced her into hard labor, said demeaning things to her, and once even raised a hand towards her. All of this she did in front of Abram, but he did nothing to protect Hagar or his unborn child. This would go on until one day she could not take it anymore. With nothing but the clothes on her back, she fled from the place that she was forced to call home. If Sarai and Abram would abuse Hagar so, then they had no right to the child she carried inside her, she thought. She sat by the spring in the wilderness, revitalizing herself with its water. There she was approached by none other than an angel of the Lord. "Hagar, servant of Sarai, where have you come from and where are you going?" I am fleeing from my mistress Sarai," she answered. The angel looked upon her with discontent before saying, "Return to your mistress and submit to her. I will surely multiply your offspring so that they cannot be numbered for multitude." Hagar felt as the will of God, as though the will of God emanated from this angelic figure. It was a power unlike any she had ever witnessed. "Behold, you are pregnant and shall bear a son. You shall call his name Ishmael, because the Lord has listened to your affliction. He shall be a wild donkey of a man, his hand against everyone and everyone's hand against him, and he shall dwell over against all his kinsmen." Was this really consolation for the abuse she had to suffer by Sarai's hand? Hagar could not bring herself to see it that way. But what choice did she have but to return when God himself had ordered her to do so? So she returned to Sarai and Abram and bore a child. His name was Ishmael, as he had spoken to Hagar. As he had spoken to Hagar, the Lord once again spoke to Abram. He told Sarai and Hagar of this, and what he called the covenant of circumcision he had made with God. All males by 8 days of age must be circumcised, lest they be cast out of the tribe. This, of course, included Hagar's own son. Abram and Sarai were reborn again, now Abraham and Sarah was foretold to fall pregnant, even in her so advanced age. No longer did Sarah have an internal feeling of inferiority towards Hagar because of her inability to conceive. No longer was Hagar abused for these reasons, but instead she was abused for Sarah's perceived superiority to Hagar. What need was there for the firstborn son Ishmael to her now? She would be the one to fulfill the covenant with God, not some foreign slave woman. As soon as Ishmael was weaned, Sarah said to Abraham, while struggling not to laugh, "Cast out the slave woman with her son, for the son of this slave woman shall not be heir with my son Isaac." Hagar saw the look of displeasure upon Abraham's face at his wife's words. Hagar had hoped that her master's husband would protect her, but the displeasure soon fell away. The next day, given nothing but bread and a skin of water, Hagar was cast out along with her son Ishmael. To Hagar, both Abraham and God himself had betrayed her. Little time passed before the water she was given ran out. In desperation, she wept and cried out to God, "Let me not look out on the death of this child." God heard her pleas and said to her, "What troubles you, Hagar? Fear not, for God has heard the voice of the boy where he is. Up, lift up the boy and hold him fast with your hand, for I shall make him into a great nation." A newfound strength was given to her, and she found it in herself to save herself and her son. She would live to see her son grow up and become a nation, but even in her old age, she couldn't help but wonder, was all the pain, hardship, and abuse worth it for this? Hagar did not think so.
So I wrote something very similar, but from a different perspective. Egypt was hot, but it was home. Hagar and her siblings ran through the sand like it was nothing to their burning souls. After years of playing and working in the desert, their feet had grown heavily calloused, and their eyes were adjusted to the constant bright sunlight. The children didn't have much, but it was all they knew. Their mother was about to give birth to another child. They were happy, and all was well. The night the child came, everything changed. Hagar had witnessed the birth of all her siblings, but no birth had been as traumatic as this one. As her mother's blood stained the woven mats on the ground, her aunt called for her to run to the village's center to ask for help, no matter the cost. Hagar prayed as she ran, begging God to save her mother. God listened and woke a woman nearby to heed her cries. The woman had delivered many babies and knew how to help. This was the first time Hagar was seen by the Lord. One night, a week after the baby's birth, Hagar woke to men tying her wrists behind her with a rope and her eyes being covered with harsh cloth. Her mother sobbed outside as Hagar was dragged onto the back of the camel. The woman who had helped Hagar's mother and the baby was poor and could not afford food for her family, so she asked for the family for money in return for her aid. The family was also poor, so instead of money, she requested payment in the form of their firstborn child, a girl she could sell as a handmaid. As the camel trotted away from everything she knew, Hagar called out for God's help again. She prayed that she would get to see her family again, or, if that was not God's will for her, she would at least be able to have children and be happy one day. Hagar didn't know it, but it was the second time she was seen by the Lord. After a long journey, Hagar and her captors arrived at a marketplace in Canaan, where she was unloaded from the camel and untied. She was sold to a childless couple named Abram and Sarai. Though she was unhappy having to give up the life she loved, Hagar quickly settled into the routine of being Sarai's handmaid. Life was peaceful until years later when Hagar overheard Sarai asking Abram to take Hagar as his wife. Hagar lived with dread until the day came when Abram ordered her to sleep with him. She followed his order and could not argue. Hagar conceived a child after sleeping with Abram, and she was very angry. She despised her mistress and began to misbehave. After speaking to Abram, Sarai started to mistreat Hagar, so Hagar fled to a spring in the desert beside the road to Shur. An angel of the Lord appeared to her and said, "Hagar, slave of Sarai, where have you come from and where are you going?" "I'm running away from my mistress, Sarai," she replied. She was crying and frightened. The angel of the Lord then said to her, "Go back to your mistress and submit to her. I will increase your descendants so much that they will be too numerous to count. You are now pregnant, and you will give birth to a son. You shall name him Ishmael, for the Lord has heard of your misery." Though Hagar was confused and overwhelmed, she understood that she had once again been seen by God, and replied, "You are the God who sees me. I have now seen the one who sees me." In time, Hagar bore Abram a son. Abram was 86 years old and gave the son the name Ishmael. Hagar was allowed to raise the child with little input from Sarai. While Hagar was unhappy that her child was not born by her choice, she still loved the boy and took gentle care of him. Years later, when Ishmael was 13, Abram suddenly appeared, saying he had received a message from God. Abram was to go by Abraham, and Sarai was to go by Sarah. Abraham relayed to Hagar that Ishmael would be blessed. He said that Ishmael would be the father of 12 rulers and made into a great nation. Hagar was pleased until later that day when Abraham declared that every male in the household needed to be circumcised. While Hagar was pleased that Ishmael would be following God, she was worried about the pain and dangers of this procedure. Still more years later, 3 men from the Lord appeared to their village. Hagar watched as Sarah retrieved 3 seahs of flour and kneaded it to make bread, while Abraham gave a calf to another servant to prepare. She listened as the men spoke about Sarah giving birth to a son within the next year. Hagar was angry, as she was forced to have a child because of Sarah's barrenness. Her anger relieved as Sarah laughed, doubting the possibilities of her giving birth at such an old age. When the Lord said to Abraham, "Why did Sarah laugh and say, 'Will I really have a child now that I'm old?' Is anything too hard for the Lord? I will return to you at the appointed time next year, and Sarah will have a son." Because Sarah was afraid, she lied and denied laughing. Hagar's anger returned, as God could have given Sarah a child long ago and saved her from being forced to sleep with Abraham. Was she forgotten by God? Her anger simmered as Abraham walked the men on their way. When Abraham was 100 years old, Sarah became pregnant and gave birth to a son who they named Isaac, just as God had promised. At 8 days old, Isaac was circumcised, and when he grew and was weaned, Abraham threw a large feast. Hagar watched this happen with extreme anger and mocked them. When Sarah saw this, she said to Abraham, "Get rid of that slave woman and her son, for that woman's son will never share in the inheritance with my son Isaac." Sarah purposely did not use Hagar or Ishmael's names, as she did not want to give them such value that Abraham refused to send them away. Even so, Abraham was greatly distressed because the matter concerned his son, though he did not love him. God saw this and said to him, "Do not be distressed about that boy and your slave woman. Listen to whatever Sarah tells you, because it is through Isaac that your offspring will be reckoned. I will make the son of the slave into a nation also, because he is your offspring." The next morning, Abraham gathered food and water and gave them to Hagar. He sent her on her way with her son towards the desert of Beersheba. Soon the water Abraham had given them was gone. Hagar set her son under some bushes out of the harsh sunlight and sat down away from him. "I cannot watch the boy die," she said, sobbing into her hands as she listened to her son cry in the bushes. God heard the boy crying and sent an angel to speak to them. "What is the matter, Hagar? Do not be afraid. God has heard the boy crying as he lies there. Lift the boy up and take him by the hand, for I will make him into a great nation." God then opened Hagar's eyes for her to see a well of water. She filled the skin from Abraham with water and gave her boy a drink. Again, Hagar had been seen by God. God watched over the boy as he grew older. He and Hagar lived in the desert, and the boy became an archer. Hagar, with great joy, got a wife for Ishmael. Years later, the prophecy from God came true. Hagar was happy, with many children to look after, as her son was made into a great nation. Her son's wife was about to give birth to another child. They were happy, and all was well. Thank you for listening.
I'd like to extend applause to these three great panels and ask if folks have questions for the panelists.
I have a question. Is there any way possible if we can get a hold of that PowerPoint about the poverty amongst college students? Because I'd like to share that with the PET team.
Yeah, if you put your email in the chat, I can send it to you right now.
I appreciate that. But can you elaborate on why you decided to do the sexual dynamics piece?
It's been something that I've been working on for a long time. In fact, my first semester of college, I decided I don't want to do forensic science. I don't like it. I don't care about it. I was just doing it because it would have a higher income, and that's what my parents wanted. Because, you know, when you're a first generation student, you want to do something that generates a good income so you can build generational wealth and you can support them. But I decided that I didn't want to do the major that I set out to do. And I was like, what do I truly care about? And I've always said I truly care about women and children. Women and children of color, they tend to be victimized the most and the least heard. And I did a research paper over the historical sexual dynamics between race and ethnicity, about how there's this sort of hierarchy of white men, white women, men of color, women of color. And it all basically started from the origins of the foundation of this country. And so now when people look at sexual dynamics today, they ask why. Well, here it is. It's in your history books, except it's never discussed in your own lessons. It's never discussed, you know, in your high schools, much less sexual health and consent. So when you look at history and sexual dynamics, they actually go hand in hand, where people see them as two very almost opposing and conflicting things, where one is centered around what some people may see as boring and white male centered, where we go into sexual dynamics and sexual victimization that is typically women centered and women of color centered. But in reality, you know, women of color have a huge role in history. So yeah, that's mostly why I decided to go into this.
All right, I appreciate that.
Yeah, I have a question for Hannah and Christina. I was just curious if, like, when you guys were researching and writing these stories, if you came across anything in Hagar's life that you personally related to.
Yeah, I relate to Hagar's story a lot, particularly the theme of going through immense trauma and struggling with a will to live and having your control ripped away from you. Control is a big theme. Hagar's life was controlled by so many other outside factors, but not, and she had very little. So, but she was able, in my perspective, in my story, she was still able to come out the other side and have a happy ending and have happiness and a family, which is what she wanted. So that is what I personally related to. I don't know about Christina.
I didn't really identify with much of Hagar's story personally. I haven't had very similar experiences.
I applaud the presenters. Thank you very much. With Hagar, the way you have brought out, highlighted the issue of class, slavery, and gender, I mean, it's just awesome. Thank you. For Alondra, is there something about the class that contributed to your motivation?
I have taken a class previously with Professor Williams, her addictions course, and I decided to take yet another course with her this semester, and this time become an honor student for her. And when I had proposed my possible projects and additional research in order to be an honor student for this course, she immediately recommended me to come here. And I was like, great, I have done research on subjects like this before. This sounds something that I am truly incredibly passionate about. And even beforehand, when meeting with her about my presentation today, I very much was grateful that she and you were able to make an exception to the deadline, because I was informed, I believe it was the day of the deadline for proposals, in order to make my decision and write my presentation. So a very great thank you to you to allow me to present here.
By the way, I hope that people are keeping track of the chat. There's some resources appearing there. For instance, Angie Paul entered reference, but I had a question myself for the first panelist. So in your presentation, you offered a really good overview of some of the resources that WSU has available for students who are in poverty. Actually, I had a two-part question. The first was your initial statistics of food insecurity for 1 out of 2 students and 14% of the students homeless. And I was wondering, are those statistics for college students in general in the US, or are they local statistics for WSU?
They were just statistics that I found that are like not local. So there's like not global, but like in the United States.
Okay. And then the other sort of part to this question, as I said, you gave a good overview of some of the resources that are available. Through constructing your presentation and doing your research, did you develop a sense of what might be some resource needs that WSU has in order to support these students who enter the university in poverty, or who encounter poverty while they're students here? Is there anything that you think would be helpful for the university to develop, or any direction that you feel like the university should go? taking that to be a no. I'm not seeing any hands and nobody's volunteering.
Well, these presentations actually show that WSU is aware of the problem, and there are gaps and areas that WSU should improve on, and not just with students. I'm sure that during the afternoon faculty panel, that faculty might also have more contribution in terms of what WSU is doing and areas that WSU can do more.
One of the things that seems to connect all three of these presentations arose for me when, I believe it was when Christina was presenting on Hagar, and the line about Hagar having said, "I have now seen the one who sees me." And there's a sense in which for all of these panels being visible at WSU, you know, making for the possibility that the university and the university systems can see those people with the challenges, the intersectional challenges that were reviewed over the course of this panel, makes for the possibility of being able to alleviate them or address them in positive and constructive ways.
See them, acknowledge them, include them, allow their voices to be part of the solution, because so that it won't be from top down, it will be from bottom up.
Yeah, these were wonderful presentations. So thank you, everybody, and a virtual applause for our presenters, and thank you, Dr. Okafor, for pulling together this conference and allowing this venue for people to share their ideas and their research and their creative work as well.